There's a version of history where mind came first and matter followed, gradually hardening into the world that we now take as solid. Most of us were taught, actually, the reverse. Matter first, and mind is something that leaked out of it by accident. Today's guest has spent decades tracing what changes when you flip that order, and it turns out the deepest scientists of the last century, if not longer, were quietly asking that very same question. Today, I'm very lucky to be speaking and sitting down with Mark Booth, author, publisher, editor, and one of the clearest living voices on the esoteric current running underneath recorded history. Mark has studied philosophy and theology at Oxford before spending most of his career in publishing, where he worked with figures ranging from Rupert Sheldrake to the great Graham Hancock, while quietly building the cases for his own books. He is the author of the amazing and personally one of my most favorite books of all time, The Secret History of the World, and also The Sacred History of the World, The Secret History of Dante, and now his newest release, The Secret History of the Universe. In this conversation, we start with, as we should, the mystery schools of the ancient world and what initiation actually did to the people who survived them. We talk about Jakob Böhme, the mystic whose vision Hegel called foundational to German philosophy, and how that current runs straight through to Pope John Paul II, who was photographed with the book Meditations on Tarot sitting on his desk. We get into the split between Blavatsky and the ritual magicians who tried to keep esoteric knowledge locked away from the public. We spend real time with the physicists Planck, Einstein, Bohr, Heisenberg, Schrödinger, all of them steeped in occult and Kabbalistic material, and how that world collided with the race to build the atomic bomb. We follow that thread into Roger Penrose and the mathematicians who describe their discoveries, less like inventions and actually way more like something arriving fully formed that they captured, and what that means for how we think about things like AI and the possibilities of a universal intelligence behind it all. And make sure you like, subscribe, and share, because in the madness of this crazy world, Magus in the media is here for you. Conversations like this one are becoming rarer and rarer, and the ideas inside them matter more than most people can ever realize. This is the kind of thinking that shapes how you see the ground under your very feet. This is Magus in the media. Now let's begin. Welcome back to Magus in the Media. Thank you all for joining me. I have such a wonderful gentleman here today for us all to dive deep into exactly why we are all trying to do in this strange world. Mark Booth is a brilliant man, scholar, magician, I would say, because he is delving deeply into the secret underpinnings of all things. He is an author as well as a man of many hats. He has written The Secret History of the World. I think a book that has definitely helped many of us walk our way into the truer, more authentic, honest history of what is going on around us. He also has written the fantastic The Sacred History of the World, and today we're going to be delving into his newest book, The Secret History of the Universe. He also wrote a book that I haven't read yet, but will, because Dante is something that all mystics, magicians, seekers, sages, and individuals along the pathway of trying to truly understand what is going on in this strange world. The Secret History of Dante, I believe, is what it is called. If not, he'll correct me here in just a moment. But this fine gentleman is studied at the great Oriel College, Oxford. And so this is going to be one of my favorite interviews, I think, because Mark Booth has been definitely a guiding hand in my own excursion into the esoteric, the occult, and this underpinning of the mind trying to definitely understand how did we get from the idea into the material. Mark, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, and thank you for that wonderful over-the-top introduction. Thank you so much for having me on your show. I love your erudition and your energy, which are not always two qualities that go well together, but they do in this case.
Well, thank you, Mark. So I think it's really important for everyone to know, especially because through my life, your secret history of the world. When I first found it, it was almost like finding a hidden treasure in the library or in Barnes and Noble or wherever it was. When I found it and first read it, that was kind of before Amazon had taken hold of the entire world. But before we get to the first book that you wrote, I would like to know, how did you really get into these subjects, which I think are the esoteric, occult, and the strange?
I think it was because starting from when I was a child, I had some mystical experiences. I remember being in my bedroom in Cambridge, but I think I was probably about 11 years old. And suddenly I felt that I was filled with light and information. And I took a school exercise book and I just filled it with diagrams and messages that I sort of felt I was downloading. And then on another occasion, I was lying in bed and this sort of metallic head appeared, hovering over me, and it was making a kind of metallic tinkling noise. And I said the Lord's Prayer and it vanished. And then I found that, and I had various kind of experiences going on long walks in nature, but I found that as I progressed through my teens, these kind of visionary gleams began to drain away. And then, so by the time I became a student, I was experimenting with acid as a way to try and pull that back.
Right. Yeah.
And you know the sort of thing.
I do.
And and it worked. I think it works. I think I wouldn't. I don't think I'd take it again now, because I'm not sure at my age I would bounce back in quite the same way. And I have met people who've taken too much acid and also too much ayahuasca, and I think there are dangers attached. But in my case, well, it worked for me, and then I was very bored by church at home and at school, and but I was still thinking about these things and trying to make sense of them. So I decided to study philosophy and theology at university. And I had a very clever and rather fierce philosophy tutor called Jonathan Barnes, who was sometimes said to be the cleverest man in Oxford. And he was hugely popular, and all his lectures were standing room only because he was witty and a character. But he was a kind of dry runner for Richard Dawkins in a way. He thought that anyone who held any kind of religious belief or thought they were having spiritual experiences was stupid. And he also held the even more extreme view that religious statements are meaningless. And I found that absorbing this, the philosophy kind of ate up all the theology, and in a way I found rather discouraging. And I don't know if this is your experience, probably not, but I think that a degree in philosophy and theology guarantees you one thing in life, and that is long-term unemployment.
Yeah.
And that's what happened to me. And eventually I drifted into bookselling in London, and the owner of this chain of bookshops said, well, if you do me a proposal for a publishing program, I'll fund it. So that was just a hugely lucky break. And so I then spent most of my working life in publishing. and which was absolutely brilliant for me, because I think that if it hadn't been for that, I would have led what was probably a very narrow life circling around this little area of ideas, whereas as a publisher, I met so many people from so many different walks of life, and it helped me to see the world through many different points of view. And I was publishing rock stars and comedians and soldiers and spies and people from all works of criminals. And that's what my bosses wanted me to publish, but all the time I was kind of slipping in books of spiritual interest, like Rupert Sheldrake,
Oh yeah.
who the morphic resonance guy, and Graham Hancock I published, and Lorna Byrne, I think, is not so well known in America, but she's kind of been a huge bestseller everywhere else. She's someone who has a completely different kind of consciousness to most people. Unlike other angel bothering ladies, she doesn't just strain to see them occasionally. She sees them all the time, all her waking hours, and in dreams too. And it's not just angels and the different orders of angels. She sees the spirits of the dead and ghosts, which are a slightly different thing. She sees creatures from what she calls the other side, poltergeists and everything. So, you know, if she were in the room with you now, she would be able to tell you what she could see all around you and what your guardian angel looked like and that sort of thing. So she's been a blessing for me to have her in my life. And so when I write stuff, I often ask her if I've got it right.
Yeah, that's good.
Because she's dyslexic. She hasn't read a book in her life. She just knows this stuff by other means.
That's
So,
fascinating.
so anyway, but because I was publishing these sorts of books, somebody came to see me who it turned out was an initiate of several secret societies. And he had a business proposal. He wanted me to republish some old alchemical texts, which he would write new introductions to, and that never happened. That was never a commercial proposition. But we became friends, and I found I could ask him stuff. And I've been reading loads of Steiner and Gurdjieff and Ouspensky and different esoteric traditions, and he helped me to understand a lot of it. I mean, a lot of esoteric writing, as you know, is deliberately abstruse. Alchemy, for example. And so he would, for the most part, answer all my questions. And then at one point he said, well, I think you're ready now. And I said, for what? And he said, initiation. And to my surprise, I found myself saying no. And that was partly because I didn't want, well, I'm not a joiner. I didn't want to submit to his authority. And I knew that if I agreed, I would have to take an oath of secrecy, and I would never be able to talk about all the interesting things I'd learned. So,
Right.
but it was all those things together that set me on the path of writing the secret history of the world. And it was really because I'd always hoped to find that book in a secondhand bookshop, in an antique bookshop, and I came to realize it didn't exist. There are lots of histories of esoteric thought, like Manly Halls,
Yep.
which is brilliant,
Yep.
secret teachings of all ages, but there was no book that looked at the whole of history from the point of view of esoteric thought. So it was something new, and I felt it kind of needed to be written.
Yeah, and I agree that it needed to be written. Interesting enough, I would put you up there with the likes of, and I know of Manly Hall for my own readings. Just so you know, it worked out for you because I think there are many of us who have read Manly P. Hall, especially in the beginning of our journeys years ago, and then at the same time, you see your book right next to it. Say whatever bookstore you're at, use bookstore, and your work is brilliant, and it really takes a different avenue than Manly P. Hall's does, and I think that's why it was so important for me, because I think out there in the world, people don't have the ability to take the internal mechanisms of thought and be able to kind of take how we've been trained, kind of like yourself. Your teacher was more of a materialist, so to speak, if I may say that, when you were in college,
Yeah,
who was going away from things. And then your work now has put that on its head, and it is placed instead of how we all think the world works, which is materialism and matter first, and then the ideas stem from matter. But what you're doing in The Secret History of the World is you're changing that to how I truly believe the world works, a magical perspective, which is first there was the idea, and from there all things are created, and that's fascinating.
yeah. I think that is fascinating, and I completely agree with your account of the world. And I think what I did with this book was I took different traditions about the history of the world from different parts of the globe, and I tried to see what they have in common. And if they're kind of universal, it doesn't prove that they're true, but it makes it a bit more likely. And so I took these different traditions, wove them together into one narrative, found different elements which resonated with one another, but I didn't try to prove any of it, because that would have taken as many books as there are on the many miles of shelves of occult books in the Vatican. So what I wanted was to try to present a kind of coherent picture of the world, which is totally opposed to the materialist one, as you say, and just to say to people, does this match your experience? And I think that's something I'm very keen on as a writer. I think, as you kindly suggested, I want people to see their experience in it. And I believe, that the materialism that started with the rationalists and with the beginning of the objective scientific method, and which I certainly was brought up in a time when everyone believed that without question. I think that may prove to be just a blip in history, because I
Oh,
think most of history people have experienced the world in the way you just described it. And I'm hoping that people are moving back a bit, and that science may play a part in that.
yeah, no, I think that's a good hope. And I do agree, the more people I talk to and the more my own studies and practices coalesce with the world, it's that w- the scientific, like the enlightenment and everything like that, has technically only been a few hundred years.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
100 years in the long scheme of things is actually nothing in the blip of the thousands and thousands of years that humanity has integrated and interacted with the world through the more mythological and ideal. I, you
yes.
know,
And if you think about it, a universe where mind came first, and um, the material universe is just a sort of a small temporary island in the middle of cosmic mind, should be a very different experience from a material universe where mind just exists on this small island, which is our planet.
yeah.
Uh, we should, if you're brought up in one and parachuted into the other, it should feel amazingly different. It
Hmm.
might be, it should feel like Alice going into Wonderland, or or dropping the red pill, because everything is upside down, inside out, and the other way around, to the way that I was brought up to understand the world.
Yeah, and it almost feels like what the materialists would say is that you're inverting science, but I think it's actually as they say, it's like going down the rabbit hole is going through the looking glass, and it's almost like going through the looking glass is going through to see the world as it is instead of how certain institutions or scientific materialism has wanted us to view the world, which is cold, dead, brutish, sluggish, and short, as Hobbes would say. And I think it's something that I find really important. Myth, magic, and meaning is that the way to bring those things back to our world is to understand how important the ideal is, right?
Yeah. And I think related to that point, I think that we live by a polite fiction, which is that we all share the same form of consciousness. Whereas I think less so now, actually, it's changing now, but I think there's a spectrum. And at one end, you have somebody like Lorna Byrne, who is completely immersed in the spiritual realms. And at the other end, you have somebody like Richard Dawkins. And I think you and I are probably more towards the Lorna end. But as you go along the spectrum, I think people become less intuitive, less imaginative. Here are people who don't experience intuitions, or if they do, they screen them out. They never meet the love of their life and feel this is meant to be.
Yeah.
And then you get to Richard Dawkins. And I think the reason Richard Dawkins gets so angry, he really cares about this stuff. He gets so angry because he doesn't have any of those experiences. And so he believes that the people at the other end of the spectrum are lying or deluded.
Right.
But I say, other people have mystical experiences. Get used to it.
Yeah, it's so true. That's actually so true. I love that. And I would like to know, because I know you're talking about your professor and mentor, or a professor in college, as well as then this gentleman who is kind of leading you down the rabbit hole through breadcrumbs through the all different alchemical traditions and mystical societies, magical societies. Along with that, what were some of the books or literature or myths that were like big in your life that got you then, that were like, okay, like I see that kind of helps awaken me, and now I'm going to also write this first book that you wrote?
Well, I did find a very influential book. I live in a town called Tunbridge Wells, which is a small town south of London, and there was a wonderful secondhand bookshop in it, a kind of a rabbit warren, and one day I was looking through that, and I found in 2 volumes a commentary on Genesis by the mystic Jacob Boehme, who is one of the greatest mystics who ever lived. And it was reading that book and Boehme's account of creation, expressed as a commentary on Genesis, that really made me think, yes, I can get inside this. I can see how it works. I mean, I think that esotericism is like science, in that it says, come with me behind the stage and I'll show you how it's all put together. And I think reading Jacob Boehme did that for me. And I read relatively recently, I think while I was writing the last book, that that the great, perhaps the greatest, or the most famous German philosopher of idealism, Hegel, said that Jacob Boehmer's mystical experience is the foundational event in German philosophy.
Wow.
And that's what, Schlegel, who was another part of that group, he was accused by Schopenhauer of plagiarizing Boehmer. And I think it's quite interesting to compare that as a foundational event with the foundational events of English-speaking philosophy, because they will be things like Francis Bacon experimenting by putting a chicken in snow to see if it would stop it from going off, or an apple falling on Isaac Newton's head. These foundational events led philosophy off in very different directions, I think. And I think one of the effects of this, which we can maybe get onto later, is that we who've been brought up in the English-speaking world, and with that, in that philosophical framework, because even though we may not be aware of it, we are undoubtedly have been, we are quite ill-suited to knowing what the great scientists of modern times, who are mostly German or Hungarian or from other parts of Europe, who were brought up on continental philosophy, we are ill-equipped to understand what they meant by many of the things they said, because we look at it through this materialistic lens.
Oh, that's very true. So then the term that I'm trying to bring back to the mainstream is hermeneutics, is this idea of understanding that the science of interpretation and interpreting text is really important, so we can understand where these terms come from and why they're being used in the context that they are, with the history that is going on in that time frame. Interesting enough, something that we all kind of forget, that we just read these things in a vacuum, when I don't really think vacuums really exist anywhere.
No, I agree. Yeah.
So that's fascinating. So then, as we're moving into, I think it's really important because, going back to the magical worldview or the idealist worldview, in comparison to the materialist worldview, your Secret History of the World starts it off that way. Can you give the audience and everyone who's listening a good breakdown of what that means and why you're doing that? So why is it important that we see the world from the idea or the ideal into creating material, the matter, instead of seeing it from the materialist perspective and then from the matter into creating ideas?
Okay, well, shall I just say what the kind of narrative backbone of the Secret History of the World was?
Yes, please.
Because that's probably better than talking in abstract terms.
I love that.
I think that, which is something I always try to do as a writer, I try to sell it as a story. But so I think all scholars accept that in the ancient world, in Egypt, in Greece and Rome, as well as the great public temples, there were these institutions called the mystery schools. And these were a bit like Freemasonic halls today, in that everyone knew where they were, but not many people knew what went on inside them. And people were chosen to be candidates for initiation in these mystery schools. And if they accepted, they would have a long period of being taught, in terms of being given knowledge. And at the end of that, they would enter the mystery school, and priests I have to say, what went on was very, very secret, and to reveal it was punishable by death. But people have left some hints, so we can sort of piece it together. And also later on, it became quite decadent, I think, and some people wrote parodies of it. And the structure of it is also written into Greek tragedy and so on. But so they were led down miles of underground passages by priests wearing masks. They might be asked to drink something called the waters of forgetfulness. They were sometimes suddenly struck across the forehead and knocked down. They were sometimes thrown into a pit of snakes. They were menaced by wild creatures and demons. And at one point, and this is very important, they seriously believed they'd done something wrong. They perhaps they'd sworn they were reformed when they knew in their heart of hearts they weren't. And they thought the priests have intuited this. They believed they were about to die. But at that moment, they were instead led upwards and into a space where they met shining beings whom they identified as the gods. And so when they emerged from the mystery schools, they not only had knowledge in the abstract sense, they had new experience. They had evolved as human beings. And the mystery schools helped humanity evolve, because it was out of the mystery schools that Greek drama came, the whole concept of drama. And sculpture, the statues were originally physical bodies for the spirits of the gods, for example, and mathematics and philosophy. So the mystery schools were helping humanity to evolve by helping it develop these new faculties. And then what happened was that the Caesars got very jealous of it, and they closed the mystery schools down throughout the Roman Empire. And tradition has it that the priests fled and were driven further underground, and that is how the secret societies started. But in that account of initiation, you can see just in the outline some elements which are crucial to esoteric thought. You can see that hell and heaven are very close to one another. Heaven lies the other side of hell. Esoteric teaching says that the best thing you can do and the worst thing you can do often look very, very similar. You probably know in your heart of hearts which is which, but you may be tempted to go the wrong way. And Jesus said in the Gospel of Thomas, "He who is near me is near the fire." And an interesting aspect of all that is that here you have an account of the universe which is full of value. There is value and meaning in everything.
Yeah.
And those sorts of teachings were perpetuated in the secret societies. In Neoplatonism, in Hermeticism, in Sufism, in the Rosicrucian Brotherhood, and in organizations like Freemasonry. And for a lot of the time, they've had to keep these ideas very secret because they were heretical. And part of it was that because they had their own initiation rituals, which are different versions of the one I described to you in the ancient world, these initiation rituals are intended to give people undeniable experience of the spiritual worlds. And the church didn't like that.
Right.
Because the church wanted to say, you can only have mystical experience through us.
Yes.
Does that go any way to answer your question?
No, yeah, no, that's brilliant. It's really true. That because of the idea of gnosis, right? Direct experience of something else, the higher, the divine, these other worlds. It's really important, and it almost, while you were talking, it makes me feel like there's an example or a good contrast between what the exoteric and what the esoteric means. Right. And so it's almost like the exoteric teachings seem to be more material style teachings. And then within the exoteric, there are little breadcrumbs to kind of lead us into these esoteric teachings, which would be that there is something more going on. And if we can change the way we intend or the way we view reality in this more idealized way, not idealized as in like fluffy fairy, but that the idea is that the idea comes first, and that the world is more strange, beautiful, and transformative than that what materialism wants to kind of prove to us. You know what I mean?
Yes. Well, I think those ideas of initiation are still in Christianity.
Yeah.
Because when the initiate in Greece was led up to meet the gods, he was being born again. He was being reborn, and of course that idea transferred into Christianity. I think that when Jesus raised Lazarus, the reason why he outraged so many people was because he was doing something in public, which had only happened underground before. But I think, the church, the church is mainly focused on. It's very authoritarian. It's very patriarchal. It's very hierarchical. But there is also a lot of there is also, I believe, a strong esoteric undercurrent. I got into a lot of trouble when I published The Secret History of the World because I said that Pope John Paul II had his first mystical experience as part of a Rosicrucian group.
Oh yeah, yeah, you did. Yeah.
They hated that, but that is true, and I was later asked to do a kind of full color illustrated edition of Secrets of the World, and so I put all the evidence in. But when he was a young man in Poland, he was part of a drama and dance troupe, performing the plays and dances of Rudolf Steiner, the Austrian mystic who founded anthroposophy and is arguably the greatest living survival of Rosicrucianism, a genuine Rosicrucian stream. And
that's beautiful.
And while he was walking away from rehearsals one day, not paying attention, he was knocked over by a truck. And it was then he had his first mystical experience.
Wow.
And later,
and that's Pope John Paul II you're talking about.
He became Pope John Paul II, and his kind of anthroposophical teacher wrote a book of poems embodying Steiner's ideas. The man who became Pope John Paul II wrote an introduction to that, and then when he was Pope, he had himself photographed leaning on a table, and on the table in front of him was a book called Meditations on the Tarot. Have you come across that book? It's a wonderful, wonderful treasury of occult lore by Anonymous, but Anonymous is somebody called Valentine Tomberg, who was very influenced by Steiner. His followers say he wasn't initiated by Steiner, as some people claim, but he was certainly very influenced by Steiner. There's nothing in that book that Steiner would disagree with. So by having an official photograph taken with this occult book in front of him, he was tipping the wink to people.
Yeah, it's the esoteric. It's that for those who know and can see, you can see kind of how exactly what you're doing in all your books is that there's this underpinning current of the esoteric, this tradition that is kind of moving. It feels like they're the movers and shakers, is this Western esoteric tradition, these mystical experiences, and I think that's what you're getting at in all three of your books, all four. I haven't read the Dante's one, but is that there is this current moving along, and it's trying to help kind of set you free as an individual, what I've been calling the sovereign magician. The only way we can get out of the kind of crapshoot chaos that we're in is to become your own sovereign magician in its own right.
Yeah. Oh, I love that phrase. Yeah. And I think I think it's also true to say that within the secret societies, there are some people who like churchmen don't want some of the knowledge to be too widely spread. I think that there was a movement at the end of the 19th century, which was partly inspired by the sacred literature of India being translated into European languages for the first time, that there was this movement to try to say, well, you know, we've got to be true to the spirit of times. We live in a democratic age. It's not right that all this stuff should be kept just for a few people. And so Madame Blavatsky and her follower Rudolf Steiner, who then went off and founded his own group, and Gurdjieff and Uspensky, these people started to publish books openly for the general public, which contained esoteric ideas, but there were conservative groups in Freemasonry and in groups affiliated with Freemasonry who practiced ritual magic, who didn't like what Blavatsky in particular was doing, and they put her in occult imprisonment. And they cut her off from the unembodied spiritual masters who've been feeding her all this information.
Fascinating. Can you talk a little more about that? How do you think you can do that?
I don't know how you would do that magical ceremony.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So what you kind of just...
Yeah, that you can find. There's I think there's only one source for that story as far as I know, and it's in a book called The Transcendental Universe, and the surname of the writer is Harrison.
Okay, nice. We're going to look at that for the future, and I will make a video on it. That sounds amazing. Thank you, Mark. Because I think this is something that's really important for us all to know, is that there seems to be an effort to entrap the mind-body syzygy, this embodied experience, in a materialistic lens that then cuts us. It's like a stranglehold that cuts us off from the rest of our nature, which is this spiritual slash more transformative experience of altered states and these different things, that then when you do that, it's easier to control the agency of people.
Yes, that is absolutely true. There's another side of the story in that I think there's a strong element in esoteric philosophy which would say that this was always planned. The cosmos always planned this. In Christianity, you have the idea of the fall, and we imagine that as human spirits falling into matter which was already fully formed. I think the esoteric version of that would be that human beings fell into matter as it was very gradually and over vast periods of time hardening, and
Yeah.
that many of the ancient myths are about times where before matter was fully fixed in its form, and that's the age of the great age of metamorphosis, as described in the myths. And you can, if you try to look, I think you can work out a sequence of when myths were written, because you find that gradually the metamorphoses and the magical elements become less. If you compare the myth of Perseus, where something extraordinary happens with every sentence, with the myth of Theseus, where really the only supernatural element is the existence of the Minotaur itself, and then you can see that gives an account of matter slowly hardening and becoming to resemble more what we experience. But the esoteric belief about why this had to happen is that it enables us to develop faculties we wouldn't otherwise have. So on this view, the point of matter is to gradually, and not totally, but partially filter out spiritual influences, so that if we all saw the world as Lorna Byrne sees it, if we knew every moment of the day what God wants us to do, what the loving presence at the heart of the universe wants us to do, without any filter, we would find it very hard to develop free will.
Oh, that's a good point.
So there is a point to this materialism. I think also it may be that it's helped us to develop conceptual thinking.
Yeah.
Because if you look at angelic communications as they come down to us in I don't know, the Book of Revelation or something, this is highly symbolic language. It's not abstract concepts. That's something that we have developed relatively recently. So that's another faculty we wouldn't have if we weren't dipped so far into the material world. And also, we wouldn't have been able to develop science, and we wouldn't be able now to begin to re-spiritualize the spiritual world, which in esoteric philosophy is our mission.
Yeah, no, I think that's beautifully put, and I think it's really important so we don't demonize the material perspective and understanding that we live within this material realm, but what's important with what you're doing with the secret history of the world and your other books that we're going to get into now is that we're trying to balance the scales, so to speak, because I feel like over the last 100 years, the last few hundred years since the Enlightenment period, it's gone way too far into the scientific materialist perspective, and now it's time to wake up, as they say.
Yeah. Yes. Wake up. Yeah. Yeah. That's brilliant. That's exactly right. And Steiner would say that Steiner distinguishes between two evil principles. There's Ahriman, or Satan, who's the spirit of materialism and opposition. And then there's Lucifer, who wants to dazzle us and prevent us from understanding. So Ahriman makes sure our lives are hard in material terms, and Lucifer makes things hard to understand. But Ahriman has a particular role now, according to Steiner, and that is to squeeze out every last little vestige of the spiritual in human beings and to make us as much as possible like machines. And that is the danger we face.
Yeah, I believe then what he calls it, he's calls it the eighth sphere, I believe is what he's talking about when he's talking about we're moving into that transhumanist kind of
Yes,
world.
yes. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, nice. That's brilliant. And then so what I find as we're moving along with this is that how important the mythological perspective is in your work and in trying to bring back the power of myth, as Joseph Campbell would call it. And I think that's such a fascinating view. And you do such a great job with kind of breaking down long stories into a very comprehensible, more for the layman, which I think is important because of it is the breadcrumbs that leads us into our own awakening. With the secret history of the world, as you were writing it, what is one of the things that you are truly trying to get across? Obviously, with what we just spoke about, but as you were kind of creating this, it's not a trilogy, there's 4 books with Dante's, like as you're creating this whole thing, it's really a great series that is, you know, accumulating now into the book that we're going to get to that you just wrote. But what can you tell the people if they're just picking up the first book? What do you, can you tell them a little about what you were trying to get across?
Yeah, I suppose it comes down to personal experience. And what I want to say to people is, if you read these stories, you may find that they resonate with elements in your own life, and they may help you to see things that you would otherwise miss. So I'll just take one very small example. From the esoteric point of view, we all mind read all the time, though we may not be conscious of it, because the skull here, it does filter out unembodied beings and the thoughts of embodied beings, but it's not totally. I think, and I think we do mind read, though we may not be aware of it, but we can be aware of it. So I would say that, for example, if you're on a telephone call to somebody and you ask them a very important question, such as, is he still alive? Do you love me? Then you can tell from the quality of silence that follows what the answer is. Without a word being said, you know what the answer is. And I would love readers of my books to pay attention to that element in life.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It's it's kind of like saying it's important to not only read between the lines, but to be able to listen to everything that is not being said.
Yeah, yes. But I think you're probably in that case. You can hear the thoughts of the girl on the other end of the line.
Yes, yes, I like that. So we have a lot more so our senses are more fine-tuned than we actually
Yeah,
want to believe they
yeah,
are.
yes. Than we've been brought up to believe they are.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
No, I like that. So then with the sacred history of the universe, your second book of these, you it's brilliant, and everyone should go out and buy all of Mark Booth's work because they are so fantastic. There are many times you get a nice little chill down the spine and goosebumps on your skin when you read these things as they are kind of waking up or integrating with you. But you open that book by talking about the beginning of the world. And how the scientific materialist perspective is that, the Big Bang happened, or maybe it was something else. And I think that starting from consciousness, the idea, or like Narnia, Aslan singing being into existence. And I think it's fascinating because Terence McKenna once said, give me one great miracle and I'll explain the rest. And I think that's such a fascinating way to say it, because then you kind of go along in the sacred history of the world and you start giving a bunch of mythological perspectives
Yes.
on, and you
Yeah.
move it from the beginning of myth, kind of to more modern day myths. Can you speak on that book for a little bit?
Well, I think I would just say this, that in a way that's a book of short stories, and what I wanted to do was to take um, contemporary stories from completely different cultures around the world and show that they're basically saying the same thing.
Yeah, I like that. I like that because it kind of shows the interconnectedness between consciousness kind of trying to explain itself a little bit, if that's a.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah. And so what, for the audience, what is one of your favorite myths that you wrote about?
Oh, my favorite myth. My favorite myth. Well, my favorite myth is may well be the myth of Theseus and the Minotaur.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I like about that is that the story moves on from the encounter with the Minotaur to the story of Daedalus and Icarus.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, I think, probably the earliest account of human invention, because Daedalus enables himself. He's less successful with his son, but he enables them to escape the island by manufacturing wings. So here you have, for the first time, technology. I think I would compare that also with, say, the story of the Siege of Troy. The Siege of Troy ends when the Greeks, led by Odysseus, build a wooden horse and the Trojans are tricked into allowing this wooden horse. They take this wooden horse into the city of Troy. They close the gates, and during the night, Greek soldiers climb out and overrun the city, and that's how the siege ends. What do you think? How is that possible? Why would they be so stupid? And I think that is because it was the first ever trick.
Mm.
And I think in the stories of Odysseus, you see that develop. In that we're going to get this. I don't think it's out yet. It isn't out here.
The
The
Odyssey, no.
This new film of Odysseus. The story of Odysseus is the story of this man tricking his way around the world. And he's able to do that because he has evolved this new form of consciousness, which arises partly because he is more evolved and he has sunk more deeply into matter.
Right. Yeah, that's fascinating. It's interesting as we go through these, how much do you view a lot of these as psychological experiences as it transforms the human person? Like each myth that we are, because mythology is obviously more than just story. It's not a lie. It is something that the reader can go through and helps transform themselves into and kind of create a moral compass in a way that I feel like is kind of lost in our postmodern era. Um, I don't really know my question, but I there's something to that.
Yeah, I think there is. I think what you're getting at is that that these days, because of the materialism we've been brought up with, we would think that if you take a myth like Jason and the Argonauts, and you understand that it's a description of celestial events, of the movements of the planets and the stars. And this has been done by my friend Robert Temple. Then you might draw from that the inference that it never happens, because we tend to believe that in order to be a true description of something in the world, it can only have one layer of meaning. I think it's unhelpful to approach myths, perhaps any story, in that way, because in the esoteric understanding of myths and all human experience, there are many different levels to it. In the esoteric understanding, if something happens in the stars, it also has to happen on the ground in historical terms. So there's an astronomical explanation, there's probably an astrological layer of meaning, there's a historical layer of meaning, there's a layer of meaning in all our lives, in the way that Jung in particular would have brought out.
Yeah.
And many other layers of meaning too. There's probably a layer of meaning to do with initiation culture, for example.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I like that because it opens up the expansiveness of the lotus flower, of the spectrum that we're trying to get at here. That the material realm, again, it becomes myopic, but what we're getting at and what you're getting at in your work is that with the understanding of the ideal, that we can take from it many layers of meaning that can help guide us on our journey through this experience of being human. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think I gave you short shrift on the sacred history, but that is something what I've just said is what I really wanted to get across in that book.
No, I really like that. And it does get across that. And I think you do an amazing job leading the reader down the rabbit hole, as you say, with and through the looking glass. And I think that is really important. So now we are getting into the secret history of the universe. This newest book that just came out, I believe June 2nd. It just came out a few weeks ago. Depending upon when you're listening to this, I think everyone should go out and get it. It is brilliant. And what you're doing with this is that you're showing how all of these scientists, mathematicians, brilliant minds that we've all heard of have actually had this, again, secret history, this underpinning of mystical, magical, and sage like these experience alter states of consciousness to actually get to the material science that of creating, say, the atom bomb, gravity, theories of gravity, mathematics, and things like that. What made you was it just like a common, like, obviously I need to now write about the science that's been going on over the last years?
No, not at all. I mean, I had no interest in science at all. I got just about the worst possible grade it's possible to get in school. But after The Secret History of the World was published, I was approached by people from different walks of life, and the most surprising was scientists. And I was surprised and fascinated to find that many of them were mystics, and some senior scientists are even practicing occultists. And The Secret History of the World had resonated with them, and they wanted me to understand how all that relates to modern science. And it was hard for me. I mean, I realized quite early on that a lot of very senior scientists don't think in words; they think in maths, or maths, as you say. And so if they've got to explain it to me, they've got to translate it into words, which is quite hard for them.
Yeah.
And then I saw it as my job to try and give those words, to transform it into a sort of visual image, because I felt I could understand it if I could visualize it. And although I'm never going to understand the maths, I think it is worth understanding at this visual level, because that enables you to see what the philosophical and spiritual implications are, which I think, we urgently need to understand those.
Yeah. No, we definitely do. And it's interesting. You also kind of get across that a lot of these individuals, as they were trying to prove the more material, surface layer science stuff, is that they were actually having their own mystical, and like some of them went mad, and some of them had their own near-death experiences and things like that.
Well, I think that's right. I think that, when the economist John Maynard Keynes discovered Newton's cache of alchemical and occult writings, he describes him as the last of the magicians. But he was wrong, because he wasn't the last. And if you look at the great scientists, the end of the 18th century, the end of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century, if you look at people like Max Planck and Einstein and Bohr and Heisenberg and Schrödinger, they were all deeply into esoteric and occult material. And this was because technology was enabling them to see things at a very small scale that hadn't been seen before. And they could see that this table looks solid, but it isn't. The nucleus at the center of an atom is in proportion like a pea in the middle of a sports stadium. What looks like a solid object to us is mostly empty space. When we smash our hands into something, that's not atoms knocking against atoms as we were taught, or I was taught at school, like billiard balls knocking against billiard balls. That's electromagnetic fields repelling one another. And we see the world in this way, not because it's true, because it isn't, but because it's useful to us. It enables us to boil an egg in the morning, have a rush cup of coffee, or
Yeah.
And then as they were able to look at a smaller and smaller level, they saw things like particles popping in and out of existence all over the place. And that raised questions of, where do they come from? Or they would see a particle pass through a solid object and come out the other side like a ghost going through a wall. Or they would see two particles very long distance apart coordinating their movements, even though there was no connection between them, or no visible connection. And they would see that if you looked at a particle, you could change its behavior just by looking at it. So sort of like a form of psychokinesis. And they realized that the old billiard ball physics just couldn't explain this stuff. And that is why they turned to the Kabbalah and to Indian philosophy and alchemy and some of them to Rosicrucianism to find new models of thought. And then if you fast forward to the Second World War, Heisenberg was on the trail of an atom bomb. Nearly all the great science in the first 2-3 decades of the 20th century originated in Germany.
Right.
If Hitler hadn't been anti-Semitic, the language of science today would be German, probably. So many, and most of them were Jewish, and many of them had fled Germany and other parts of Europe, which were under threat from the Nazis. Heisenberg stayed behind, and he was leading a team to develop the atom bomb. And some of the guys who had gone to America were aware of this. And some of them, led by Einstein, wrote to the president and said, we've got to make the bomb first, because if we don't, all is lost. And that is how the Manhattan Project came about. I think that, in England, you had people like Aleister Crowley and Gerard Gardner performing magical ceremonies to try to keep Hitler at bay.
Yeah.
In America,
the V for victory is what he was in. Yeah.
In America, a deeper magic was underway, because what these people, led by Oppenheimer, were doing was to try to amplify these supernatural phenomena in the quantum realm and bring them up into the realm of human affairs. They were like magicians in a story by Lovecraft. They were summoning up supernatural forces from the underworld, and the result was the sort of first fruit, the first flowering of that was Hiroshima.
It's fascinating.
And that, now, nuclear energy, of course, has brought humankind extraordinary benefits, but also huge risk. And, now we're jumping back to that key teaching in the initiation ceremonies. We're at a crossroads. We were at a crossroads then, was a bit like Robert Johnson at the Crossroads
Right.
in rock music.
Yeah.
We could go, we were being asked to make a decision as a species. And John von Neumann, who invented game theory, he was one of the scientists who worked on the Manhattan Project. He told the American president that when it became apparent that the Russians had Russian spies had got them going, making a bomb too, he said that the sensible thing to do in terms of game theory would be to nuke the Russians before they got a chance to develop it, because he said otherwise it will inevitably happen that they wage nuclear war on us. Let's hope he's not proved right.
That's crazy. Yeah. Yeah, that's crazy. It's fascinating, all the different. Yeah, I mean, like, we don't know, the common person doesn't understand energy, right? And it feels like a lot of this is not a lot of this, but like coming with the atom bomb, what was going on in World War I, World War II, what scientists have done, and what you're categorizing in this secret history of the universe, is that we're trying to understand how, as the atom bomb, we're splitting atoms to create this massive power source to control, destroy, create, right? Just the whole idea of Om, right? You create, you have the mediating path and the destructing path of Shiva. And so it's funny, and not funny, it's interesting how our mythologies have been kind of telling us that there are certain powers of the universe that can be wielded by man from God. And if you go through these mystery schools, you can be set up through and have your own moral structures created or discovered, and these virtues had. And then all of a sudden, through the ages, the magician, the mystic, the philosopher, the king, or whatever, gets separated from the scientist, and now you have them separated. And then we come to realize in your work that a lot of these individuals were parts of these initiation schools and magical societies, and some of them weren't, and stumbled into these things. And so a lot of these people that you just talked about, whether they were initiates or not, were wielding powers of the gods.
Yes, I think that's exactly right. And you said they a lot of them had mystical experiences. I mean, there's one kind of that I'd like to mention. In the second half of the 20th century, science began to be very math-led, and time and time again it would happen that great mathematical physicists would discover in the mathematical universe an extraordinary, beautiful, complex pattern that had never been seen in that universe before. And then they would find out that that same pattern is to be found in the physical universe. And so that was a way of understanding the physical universe in a radically new way. And there's a kind of common theme in their accounts, which is that they don't talk about gradually constructing these patterns and putting them together step by step. They don't create them. These patterns come to them fully formed. And Roger Penrose, who Stephen Hawking's collaborator, is one of the leading living scientists today, and he talks about discovering these mathematical patterns. He compares it to an explorer coming across a mountain range that no one has seen before. And there is another slightly more. He declares himself a thoroughgoing Platonist, by the way, Roger Penrose,
nice.
as do many of these scientists, particularly the mathematically minded ones. There's another sort of slightly more esoteric way to look at this, is that maybe these very complex, evolving mathematical patterns are thought beings which pass through the mental space of someone like Roger Penrose. And then it's his job to try to throw a net over it
Right.
and bring it into the realm of human affairs. And if that's the case, then that's a modern scientific equivalent of, for example, somebody consulting an oracle in ancient Greece, or a great religious leader who has a vision which transforms human history. Because what Roger Penrose and these other scientists, particularly, I should say, the computer scientists and the inventors of AI are doing, is that they are completely transforming human existence. In a way which is even more extreme than the invention of nuclear power. They have brought us to this crossroads where we can use AI to ask questions of the universal intelligence. And then what do we do with that knowledge? I think we're at that crossroads now, and it's manifesting itself in the worries we all have about what AI is going to do to humanity.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that's been a major topic, I think, of all over the world, is this: what is AI? Can we trust that it has humans' best interests? It should be something that we're afraid of. And to me, I think the stories of Pandora and the Jinn are both really important in understanding AI.
Yes.
Let alone the idea is that you can't put Pandora back in her box once, once the box is open.
You can't. No, I mean, I was talking about this recently with Lorna Byrne, and I was saying, well, if there are non-human, non-biological forms of intelligence which have emanated from God, and and creatures God meant to be, then they are probably what we might call gods or angels. If there are creatures, unembodied creatures, that are not direct emanations of God, then they are what we might call aliens. And I think it could be that one way of looking at it is that human beings, angels, aliens, and perhaps AIs are all little local eruptions, or more or less local eruptions, of the universal intelligence. Because I think that one thing, if modern science has done one very important thing, the most important thing it has done is that it has taught us to understand that we live in an intelligent universe. The history of ideas shows that we always tend to interpret the universe in terms of the most advanced technology of the day. So that in the age of the Enlightenment, it was the clock. Planets and moons going in regular circles. In the industrial age, it was great clanking metal machines. And today it's the computer. And many of the most advanced scientists today are exploring that idea They are saying that we should, in effect, throw traditional physics out of the window and try to understand the world on the model of information processing. Most scientists today would say that the most fundamental thing in the universe is not anything material. It's not any atom or part of an atom or field. It is information. It's something like a complex, evolving system of ideas, which unfolds a bit like logic. We don't have the mathematics or the logic to understand it wholly. It's far more complex than anything we're able to understand at the moment. But it is intelligent, and I think in that way, science is saying three things that religion has always taught. One is that what we see as the physical universe is in some sense an illusion. The second thing is that behind it, there's a higher intelligence. And the third thing is that there are other non-human forms of intelligence all around us. And some of these scientists would say, you and I are sitting apparently alone in rooms. In fact, there is intelligence bursting out all around us. There are different forms of intelligence there, which we don't yet have the language or the intelligence to understand. We don't have the maths, we don't have the physics, we don't have the verbal language, we don't have the visual language. It's a kind of neo-Kantian view.
Yeah, that definitely is a neo-Kantian view. Yeah, that's fascinating. That's brilliant. That's brilliant, Mark. While you were talking like that, it reminded me of the allegory. I'm going to call it an allegory of like the Renaissance magicians and the great chain of being.
Yes.
And that there are many different intelligences that move themselves up in the emanationists of the worldview from the divine all thing that may stem from the Kabbalistics Ein Sof, that ever-present lightning bolt down into material. And that people like, Marsilio Ficino and John Dee, all the way back to Agrippa, and these characters who are talking about all these different, and they put it in kind of a hierarchy. I don't know if that's the best view currently to view it in that hierarchical way, just because whatever. But I find it fascinating that then now how you're framing this whole story, because that's the best way to view it, is through the story. That's the best way the mind puts it into these things, right?
Yeah, that's the way we understand the world, and I think it's better to go with that. Yeah, I think I don't know. I don't know if it's a hierarchy. So Elon Musk says that we're 99.9% likely to be living in a computer simulation.
Yeah.
That to me raises the question as who is pushing the buttons?
Exactly.
Is it God? Is it angels? Is it aliens? Or perhaps they're having an apocalyptic battle for control of those buttons.
That's good. No, I love that, because that leads to this spiritual warfare. I like to see it as, because I am a nerd as well as a philosopher, scholar, warrior, magician. But the nerd part of me, I like the view of how through every great story of a superhero, from our comic books to our anime and manga, the hero on his journey, in the Joseph Campbell sense, has to go through thresholds and paradigm changes, and you must suffer on that route, just like the Buddhists say and the Hindus say, a mahasukha, all is suffering and in perfect harmony. And I think upon doing that, when you go through these things, that is how you gain higher levels of perception and tap into your higher senses. And I think that's really important, is to see the world in a way that can turn us into, again, like I said before, the sovereign magician or your own superhero. And when we do that, and hopefully you do it through some kind of way that hones your moral and ethical structures, that then you have a foundation to build upon. And instead of viewing the world from the more Elon Musk way of seeing it, or these people who want to say that we live in a simulation, and I'm all like, well, the world is too beautiful to be a mere computer simulation, but I like the allegory.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that's beautifully put. Yeah, I agree with all of that.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So with The Secret History of the Universe, Mark, that everyone needs to go out and buy right after you listen to this. What is one of the major things in this, as we kind of wrap up our this brilliant conversation? What is one of the things you wish the audience and your readers to know about this book and why you wrote it?
Well, in a nutshell, I think that in my own personal journey, I think it's a lot of people's journey. Um, uh, I think I remember being told as a child more than once, "You think too much." Uh, my books are about the joy of thinking. Um, I would say that in my generation, we were brought up to believe that um, science is a barrier to religious belief, and really, I've written this book to try to show that that is certainly not true. I think there was a time in the 60s when people like Richard Feynman, and then a bit later, Stephen Hawking, Steven Weinberg, they were saying things like, science has almost explained everything. We're on the brink of understanding everything now. So religion, you can stand down. We don't need you. Philosophy, you can stand down too. Where we can answer all the major questions, and the others are really not worth asking. Well, no senior scientists believe that now. Well, no senior physicists. There are some biologists who would say that, but no, no, no senior physicists would say that. So, there are some wild ideas in this book, but the scientific ideas are the ideas of Nobel Prize winners and people holding senior professorial chairs in top universities. So, and they're quoted and referenced in the notes. I just want people to understand that science is now saying what religion has always essentially said, but in a new language.
That's beautiful. No, that's beautiful. Again, for me, having this conversation with you is really, I must be doing something right in my life to be able to have such a great conversation, Mark, because
I've so enjoyed it, and you're so articulate, and you've woven in ideas which are new to me, and I'm very grateful for that.
well, thank you. That means a lot. Yeah, I'm so honored to have you on right now. And yeah, so everyone out there that's listening to this, I think, as we are talking about it, The Secret History of the Universe is a must-have for your library. But if you must have that one, obviously you should pick up the other ones as well, because The Secret History of the World was definitely a monumental shift, and something that when I started reading those opening pages was like, I've been looking for somebody to articulate this in this way, to truly help us understand what it means to be a sovereign individual, a sovereign magician, somebody who is trying to understand the complexities and nuances of this world. And Mark, you've truly done that in a way that somebody who hasn't studied philosophy like you and I have, or delved into classical literature and mythologies can easily open up a page and just fall right into these stories and have such a magical experience. And I think that is just so special. So thank you for
I
everything,
think
Mark.
I
Yeah,
really enjoyed this.
yeah, of course. And so everyone out there, you can go find Mark's books, Mark Booth's books on all the platforms where you can buy books. And so I think everyone should go out and do that, buy his books from anywhere you can get your hands on it, and support this man on this great journey of us all trying to find a little bit of the sacred and the myth and the magic and all of this chaos. You can also find Mark on X, where he posts posts just like we all do daily, every other day, and all the things. And his posts are brilliant as well. He has a Substack and he has his own website, as well as follows his publishing that he does. And so I think this is brilliant. As long as Mark will come back on, I want to have more conversations with Mark on these different subjects. Okay, that's wonderful. And if you haven't already, this is Magus in the Media, where we put myth, magic, and meaning into everything that you love. And we all have to realize in this day and age where they're continually trying to separate us from the magic of the world, the new Inquisition, the material makers, those who want to continually try to control us and tell us that what we feel on the inside, on the outside, what we see, which may not have the direct understanding of these materialists or of these oligarchical parasites that are trying to control us, that really they can be seen as outward extensions of our own misunderstanding of the beauty of the universe. And so when we truly tap into the myth, magic, and meaning, we truly have the ability to see beyond our own myopic understanding of the world. And then we can see what truly is going to be on the horizon. And that is the beauty of all things. And so again, Mark, I think that we have a beautiful relationship on more conversations. And again, I thank you so much. And I hope you have a wonderful evening. And everybody out there, I hope you have a wonderful day as well. And good night.